we go through this, this years, I mean, a decade or decade and a half sometimes of training, and you get to the end of that and you get into clinical practice, and there are all these external pressures of, a bunch of often non-physicians or business owners telling you that you've got to be more productive. You've got a payer system that's misaligned with actually keeping people well, and we all know we have this sick care system, not a healthcare system. And so you have a misaligned incentive, rather, and a broken system that is not aligned with what our innate desires are to actually be able to help people. So I think just recognizing that for what it is, I think is an important first step, because a lot of people, I think, don't know what the pain point is. They just kind of show up every day and they're in the grind and like, man, why is this not working? And as they say, kind of when you're inside the box, you can't read the label or can't see the forest for the trees. Same idea.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Be Empowered, the podcast, where we dive into the realities of healthcare and entrepreneurship. We offer our opinion unfiltered, unapologetic, and always with a dose of empowerment. We're here to amplify voices, yours and ours, challenge the status quo, and explore what it truly means to thrive. I'm Dr. Santoshi Bilakota.
And I'm Dr. Shala Mokbel.
So let's get into it. Today, we're excited to welcome back Dr. Ryan Williamson. He's a neurologist and author and a leader dedicated to optimizing brain health and whole person wellness. Dr. Williamson recently released his book, The Incredible Brain, which explores how our daily choices, mindset, and sense of purpose profoundly shape our brain and overall well being. His work blends science, practical strategies, and inspiring insights that empower people to live longer, healthier, and more fulfilled lives. So we're so excited to have you back, Ryan. Thank you so much for joining us. How does it feel to go from being a neurologist to like a best-selling author?
Well, first off, ladies, thank you for having me back. It's a pleasure to be here with you both again. And obviously, Shala and I go way back to residency. And funny enough, Shala, Dr. Baru actually sent a group text out to our class this morning. He's stepping down as program director. This was our Shala and I shared the same program director at Georgetown years ago. So he's finally making the transition. But anyway,
Yep.
was thinking about you earlier today. He was texting all of us. So, well, Santoshi, to answer your question, in some ways it's surreal. It's something I don't really think about every day until I get a text or an email from somebody, and that's probably been the not probably that has absolutely been the single most motivating and powerful feature of this whole journey for me is to hear the impact that this book or this information has had on people's lives. To the effect that somebody will say, my dad was struggling with depression or with obesity or with just not making the right choices in life, and now he's up and he or she or whomever is up and moving, or they're getting out in the world, or they've taken control of their health, their sleep is better, they're feeling better, they're doing more of what they love, they found their purpose. So it's really resonated, and it honestly makes me emotional when I get these messages, because that's why I did this, was to try to help and make a difference. And for those that have read it, at least those that reach out, that seems to be doing that.
So in your book, you described the brain as the most valuable organ. What do people most often overlook when it comes to protecting their and supporting their brain health?
It is funny that it's something we take for granted. I mean, I think obviously as a neurologist, we're as all neurologists, right? We're biased. I'd say the brain's most important, but we could have a perfectly functioning body or other organ systems, but if we don't have our consciousness, or we don't have language or perception, meaning, feeling, all these wonderful things that our brain does for us, if we don't have those facets in place, it's hard to appreciate in any of the things in life that make life special. So I think it's something that we all take for granted, maybe don't think about, as much.
And Shala and I read the book and we like love it. I mean, I think as neurologists, like you said, this is a lot of stuff that we preach. We talk about it, we counsel folks on it, but I think sometimes it's harder to put into place when like what you're supposed to do. But I think sometimes there are time constraints in people's day-to-day lives. So what are some simple changes or daily habits they can adopt that can make meaningful differences?
Yeah. So I think one of the weirdest facets of modern life, and maybe we touched on this in the last podcast, is that our evolutionary biology and our design has become far removed from our modern world and our social and our technological evolution. And we have rates of anxiety and depression that are through the roof. We have burnout that's through the roof. We have metabolic dysfunction, ever rising rates of insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, of growing dementia epidemic around the world. I mean, like, you look at all the health parameters, and it is not looking pretty, right, across the disease spectrum for chronic disease. And you look at the environment that we're in, and it's almost like it's no surprise, right? I mean, what does the average person do, at least in the Western world? We sit indoors all day. We don't move. We're isolated. We're more connected. I mean, we have Zoom and, of course, the internet, and everybody's got a smartphone at their fingertips. So in some ways we're more connected, but in other ways we're more isolated. So we don't have these tribes that we evolved in. We eat the wrong stuff, and not, in incorrect quantities usually, and we consume far more calories than we need. And our sleep is interrupted because of screens and lack of physical activity and circadian misalignment, and we're just generally stressed all the time. And that is an absolute recipe for disaster across almost every organ system in our entire body, namely our brain. And to me, it's a pretty simple fix. I mean, if back to your question about habits, I mean, what can we do? Well, I mean, if we respect our circadian rhythms, and we make movement a priority, we learn enough of the basics of nutrition, get our bodies moving and get that calorie balance right, focus on healthy, meaningful relationships, focus on helping regulate our nervous system and get out of that sympathetic state, and just relax our minds and our bodies, whether it's meditation, gratitude, whatever, getting together with friends for coffee, whatever your thing is, focusing on quality sleep habits. That's like 90-95% of it right there, before we even turn to the first pill or drug or whatever. And that's pretty easy to put in place, I think, for most people, if they just know the formula.
I couldn't agree more with you that we are connected, but we are more isolated than before, because there is something about that, human touch or human interaction, in-person interaction, that is definitely missed. And I would say even this world of connectivity, this world of text messaging and emails and things like that, it's actually, to me, it added more stress, rather than feeling that, oh, I'm connected to people. Even I would say social media as well. And there are studies that show that social media has increased rate of anxiety in our adolescents. It's not even recommended for kids to go on social media, especially up until they're in high school. You said that there has to be sense of purpose, and I couldn't agree more with you that there has to be a sense of purpose. For many people, including physicians, they do struggle. They struggle to define their purpose beyond the productivity at work, beyond their identity as a physician. What steps can help mainly physicians, or even APPs, to rediscover and realign with their purpose, and it wouldn't be just about productivity?
Yeah, that's all well said, Shala, and I couldn't agree more with all of that. When it comes to purpose, this has been as something that's in the literature, to something anecdotally that my patients have shared with me over the years, and something I've just come to adopt and understand as something that's clearly beneficial for us. But I think if you ask any of our provider colleagues, whether physicians, APPs, anybody, why did you choose this life, or why did you go down this training pathway? And almost universally, the answer would be, well, I just don't want to help people, right? And it's usually some personal story of early loss, or somebody went through a personal medical issue or endeavor, or a parent or a friend or somebody or a grandparent, they watch someone suffer. That's a common story for all of us. And we go through this, this years, I mean, a decade or decade and a half sometimes of training, and you get to the end of that and you get into clinical practice, and there are all these external pressures of a bunch of often non-physicians or business owners telling you that you've got to be more productive. You've got a payer system that's misaligned with actually keeping people well, and we all know we have this sick care system, not a healthcare system. And so you have a misaligned incentive, rather, and a broken system that is not aligned with what our innate desires are to actually be able to help people. So I think just recognizing that for what it is, I think is an important first step, because a lot of people, I think, don't know what the pain point is. They just kind of show up every day and they're in the grind and they're like, man, why is this not working? And as they say, kind of when you're inside the box, you can't read the label or can't see the forest for the trees. Same idea. So just observing that for one and understanding it, I think, is helpful. But beyond that, I think reconnecting with an idea, with an entity, with something bigger than ourselves is one of the best ways to start. And there are many ways that I think people can do this. So service being one. And when we think about service, we think about, well, why am I really here? What am I really called to do? And for some people, that's religion, and maybe that looks like God or a deity or a spiritual practice of some sort. For other of us, maybe it's our families, or it's the legacy that we want to live, or the life we want to lead. And for providers and physicians in particular, I think to a large degree, it's to help relieve suffering and better the health of our fellow humans, right? And so looking for ways that we can do any of these things to help connect with a higher purpose, to help connect with, again, the idea or the entity bigger than ourselves, and to find ways throughout our day that we can make that meaningful. And perhaps an example of this is that if you're in the middle of a busy workday, rather than looking at the schedule and saying, "Oh my gosh, I've got 30 patients in clinic today," or "I've got a round on so many in the hospital, I'm carrying all these pagers, all this responsibility," rather than focusing our attention on the negative, which is, by the way, what our brains are designed to do from an evolutionary perspective. We call that negativity bias. But reframing and being grateful for the opportunity to be able to help serve people and focusing on the moments that matter. Like when we do get to connect with somebody who's fearful of their diagnosis or of whatever problem they have in front of them, to really hone in on the small moments where somebody offers thanks that hey doc, you made a difference in my life, or maybe you saved my life. To really relish those moments, reflect on them, and be grateful for them, because they do happen, and they're scattered about almost every day that we're in the hospital. Somebody's offering some version of that. I think that's a good place to start, and then working backwards, we can talk about systems to put in place to help buffer some of that too, without jumping ship or having to go write a book or or do whatever else, right? That's not being in a clinic or hospital.
I think right now we're in the most technologically advanced timeline of our evolution, and also like the pharmaceutically most advanced timeline. However, I think we are like the sickest we've ever been. And I think that comes back to what you mentioned, or you both mentioned, about connectivity. Just because we have access to each other and we're all connected so much doesn't mean we're actually really connected. Like I see myself staring at my phone way too often. Like my screen time's insane, even though I try to make it a point not to be in there. I think a lot of us feel that way because of work or other social obligations. And then you're kind of also stuck in the grind because you're always working, you're not sleeping great, you're eating like crap, not getting enough exercise. So I think all those points that you made are very important. Sometimes I will travel to some of these smaller countries with like a more easier way of life, even like the villages of India where I'm from. And people live until their 90s, 100s, and they're still healthy. It's just a much simpler, happier way of life. And so coming back to physicians, a lot of physicians, I mean, a lot of humans in general, a lot of our thoughts are negative. And I think physicians included, my husband would agree that 80 to 90% of my thought process is very negative. So, how do you suggest we shift our minds from like this default negative loop that we're stuck in? Because I think that also makes a difference in terms of longevity.
Sure does. And I think that's every spousal relationship, right? You're really good at pointing out the negatives in your partner. As I was mentioning before we started recording, that my wife and I just got back from a 2-day marriage retreat where we openly discussed these things and were intentional about our planning. So yeah, that's very relevant after 2 days of that. Um, um, but yeah, so how can we start to reframe this negativity bias, which is what it's termed? Again, it's there for a reason. It's there for evolutionary reasons. Where if we are one of the main biological drivers of how we all ended up here is propagation of our genetic material, right? And so if that was a primary driver of natural selection, it would have behooved your ancestors to assume the worst about one of two possible outcomes if they were to see a threat in front of them, or at least a perceived threat, i.e., a silhouette that looked like a dangerous predator potentially, and even if it weren't, be safer to avoid it and go seek shelter than to go, is that a lion? Then gene's in there, right? So it's there for a reason, keep us safe. But the problem today is that that doesn't serve us well because, to your point, Santoshi, when in inshallah, when we're constantly bombarded with the emails and the phones and the texts and the alerts, that sets off that sympathetic storm of fight or flight and danger. When really, in fact, I mean, no email or text is dangerous. I mean, there might be stressful information, but like that's not like your phone's not going to eat you. It's not life threatening. It's a silly thing to even think about, but it still activates these same innate mechanisms that we have that help get us out of danger, right? Um, so again, recognizing that's the system, step one. Step two, build in stop gaps to try to distance ourselves from that as much as we can. I love the intentionality, Santoshi, about putting limits on screen time. So for one, get away from the stimulus or compartmentalize your day into, hey, I'm checking emails at this time, making this efficient, or texts. And if you can get away with it, assuming you're not on call or whatever you have to do, where you've got the pagers going off, which is great for the sympathetics, right? A nice shrill chirp that jolts you out of bed at night or whatever. Assuming you're not, in that situation, put your phone on do not disturb and focus on what you need to do, whether it's being present with patients or getting your charting done or being with your family at dinner and not constantly having this desire to reach for the device. Um, but from there, a couple other things that are massively helpful. Gratitude, number one. I know this term gets thrown around, and there are all these buzzwords now like gratitude and wellness and mitochondria and trauma and all these things, right? But really and truly, there's data behind this. If we can focus on measuring backwards, meaning rather than looking forward to the I have tos, the I need tos, the I shoulds, back to okay, what do I have? What am I thankful for? What's present in my life? What gives me energy? The fact that I've got security or a safe place to practice or live or sleep. I've got a family that loves me. I've got even something simple like I've got two arms and two legs, if that applies, or I'm a capable person, or whatever, or a brain to help interpret my consciousness or my, whatever my interests are. I mean, they're these really simple things that are very profound when we think about them, and that starts to reframe and reshape our thoughts. I know I don't need to explain neuroplasticity to paraneurologists, but but for our listeners, what we focus on is what our brain optimizes for, right? Our brain is a prediction machine, a prediction generating machine. And so if we optimize for one set of behaviors, we tend to gravitate towards and focus on them. And if we reinforce negative thinking with more negative thinking, well, guess what? That's probably what you're going to end up with in days and months and years forward. Whereas if you start to optimize for the alternative to gratitude and mindfulness and being present and feeling and thinking in a more positive fashion, that you start to cycle out of those negative thoughts. And that is, I mean, it's a simple shift, but it is massively, massively powerful in terms of the long-term benefits that can have on just reframing everyday situations and probably living a longer life. To your point, Santoshi, about your fellow former countrymen in India, but also in just a better quality of life day-to-day period.
Going back to what Santoshi said about the villages and other countries, I have a nice story about that. When we were in one of the villages in Peru just recently with my kids, 6-year-old and 4-year-old, we have basically zero screen time for them. They don't go on screens at all, except for on planes. But it was very interesting that there was this village, and so we went to eat lunch in a plaza. And the woman was the owner of the restaurant, and she was the one cooking. And she had her own kids, 4-year-old, and I would say maybe 2-year-old, that were there in the restaurant, in and out, playing in the plaza with their scooters, no phones, nothing. Of course, they were speaking Spanish, and my kids, they don't know Spanish very well, very limited. But we were just observing how these 4 kids were able to communicate and engage, and they were taking turns on their scooters and play together. And by the end of it, my kids were just throwing Spanish words that I didn't know they know. It was such a great experience and a great thing to see, which you don't see that here. Whenever we go to a restaurant and I take my kids to the restaurants, I try to engage with them because because every table I look at, I see that unfortunately the parents have given a device to their kids, and their kids are just, watching a cartoon or something, and there is absolutely zero engagement with the world. I am worried our future generations are going to be very negatively affected by this. I'm worried that kids are not going to be able to learn the skills of talking to each other and engaging with the world. So it is problematic. I think this is a good segue to talking about AI. So you mentioned in your book that the human brain processes only a fraction of the information it receives, especially compared to AI, right? What do you think that makes the human thinking and intuition uniquely different? How do we survive?
These are profound issues and great questions. I think that deserve, if not all of our attention, a lot of our attention in today's world. And this is a rapidly accelerating, I'll call it a problem, but at least a puzzle to be solved. I'd say that. Um, there's some people that believe that AI has already superseded human intelligence, right? I mean, that the idea of AGI, or artificial general intelligence, if you listen to Ray Kurzweil, he says that's probably going to be 2029, and maybe some people say it's a little bit further off. I mean, I think we may have covered this, but ChatGPT passed the neurology boards in December of 2023, I believe. And not only did it pass it, but it did better than the average neurologist. And this was 2 years ago, over 2 years ago now, and it gets better with each iteration. I mean, like I think it was last week that ChatGPT Health came out. We have open evidence for doctors now. We have obviously Gemini and all these. This is like every week. Like you read a new article and you're like, oh, like here's another thing, right? It's advancing. So to me, it's not a question of if, but when human. How to say this? The the traditional professions, that I think we've relied on, or the traditional roles that we've relied on. We hear about, job replacement and things like this. That to me is a when, not if question, and that's, we're not talking about factory workers and truck drivers and things like this. I mean, these are white collar jobs like physicians, accountants, attorneys that will largely be replaced, I think, by autonomous agents, right? By AI. Um, so what does that mean for us? Well, I think this is where the ethics, the planning, and an abundance mindset here, focusing on the positive, not the negative, to really get this right, is what will carry us through this. So what can AI not take from humans or from people? That's humanity, right? It's characteristics of being human. So I think we have a real opportunity to return to some of these basics that make us more human and make us happier, i.e., getting together in groups and tribes, spending time together, having an opportunity to create more, to tell our unique stories, to have a personal brand or a following, things like this, like what you guys are doing on the podcast. But I think that at least in our profession, it will likely be considered malpractice to not have AI oversight in a matter of a short few years, because it's going to be so much more efficient at the algorithms and the diagnostics and the doing. But I think as people, we'll still likely want someone to put a hand on our shoulder and tell us it's going to be okay, or walk us through what's scary, even if the AI is doing a lot of the heavy lifting on the decision making. So focusing on the human elements, like I said, connecting with one another, I think that's very important. And then leveraging and utilizing technology as a tool, because I tend to view this as an opportunity for abundance. I mean, there are a lot of people having a conversation right now about not just a universal basic income, which is an idea that's been thrown around previously, but a universal high income. I mean, humans have identified for so long with their job as being part of their identity, and if all these jobs are displaced by AI across the board, but if the AI is able to improve GDP and just the general earning power of people in a country or a world or wherever, a region, this creates more abundance than we've ever known or we've ever thought of. And so if we've now got this time freed up to say, well, I don't have to go, punch my time card at the hospital or go change tires at Jiffy Lube or whatever your job or your profession is. This gives us our time back and an opportunity to really reflect and think about what we want life to look like. Now it's a very obviously utopian view of that. And there's some people that bring up the whole Terminator and all the negatively connotated views of the future. And I think if we get that wrong, if we don't train AI and machines well enough, I mean, I suppose that's a possible alternative future. But I think I really think there are a lot of people that are thinking about this at a high level, that I am gravitating towards the more positive utopian view of this rather than the fear mongering that you see in the news a lot.
Pause here for this week, but don't go too far. We'll be back for part 2 next week, and we'll tune into the rest of the conversation. Thank you.